This is part 2 of Pam's story titled Married to a Pedophile. In part 1, you heard the overview, and in part 2, we dig deeper as she talks about why wives of pedophiles often don't know the truth about their husbands. She talks about rebuilding her life after the divorce and how she dealt with anger, fear, and forgiveness. I think you'll see a woman who has rebuilt her self-respect and has found happiness again. Being married to a person basically with a criminal past, and especially someone like a pedophile, I mean, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of public shame. How do you deal with the whole issue of self-respect?
I didn't have a whole lot of self-respect for a lot of years. I've always had self-esteem issues. And when there were problems, I would often blame myself, even though I was argumentative. More often than not, I thought it was me causing the problems, or it was me being crazy. He couldn't possibly be having an affair. He told me he wasn't. So I had very little respect for myself, but except for where it came to work. I'm good at my job, and I love my job, and that's sort of where I threw my focus, was in that. So that sort of survived while everything else was falling down around me. And then after he was gone, and between therapy and journaling, I wrote probably 75 pages of typed information on my story, that I got some of that self-respect back, and I started to remember who I was before all of this started. And it takes work. It's really hard work to go back to figure out who you are alone from and separate from where you were in that relationship.
What were some of the milestones for you as you looked for that new Pam, or found the real Pam?
It was little things where, growing up, I liked to take things apart or build things, or, I liked that sense of accomplishment. So in the first month he was gone, I had 2 cars die on the same day. One of them was a battery, and I had called somebody at church to see if they could come replace it. And then I realized, well, that's foolish. I went and bought the battery and I replaced it myself. And it was or I patched holes in the walls and repainted, where stuff was damaged in the house we were living in. It was finding those little things again that I could do, and remembering, oh yeah, I can do that. And I do have the strength to do this. And I do have this capability, and I am strong, and I am surviving. It's always, every day you have to tell yourself how strong you are, and you have to get up and you have to keep going. And it sounds crazy, but I'm grateful that I was a single parent when all this happened, because it drove me to keep going. And as time went on and you adjust and you realize and you look back and you say, I don't know how I did that, but clearly I did. And it builds up some more of that self-esteem, and you realize how far you can come despite what was in your past.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's everything you just shared is totally relatable. I learned how to do plumbing using YouTube and fixed all kinds of things, and looked at my car and tried to figure out what was wrong with it, Googled it so that at least I would have the right words for it when I talked to the mechanic. Right. So, we can really educate ourselves quite a bit and stand on our own 2 feet. And it is a great feeling. And what you said about children, I totally related to too, because when you're a single mom, you don't have the option of curling up and dying. You've got to show up for those kids. And frankly, they're going to love you whether you look like, trash or not. And they need you no matter how you feel or how you look. And you're just going to have to put that food on the table somehow. And it doesn't have to be anything great, but you just got to keep going. And I think there is a real advantage for some of us who had children, especially little children during that time. We just had to keep going. Tell me about your anger toward him and what happened with that and where that went.
I've been kind of an angry person my whole life, but it really culminated in 2015 when all that happened. I was infuriated. And I remember feeling like when I found out that he had had the affair, which was several months after, and I had actual proof of it, um, I remember feeling like I wanted to go stand on top of a mountain and yell and scream and tell everybody what he had done. But you have people telling you to be quiet. So my anger was taken out quite often in things like finding a room to clean because I needed to get that burst of energy out. And I hate cleaning, and I'm not real good at house cleaning. So if I was driven to go clean something, I was really really angry, or I would, scream in a pillow, or I was gonna say I didn't have a punching bag then. I have one. It's a wave master for my daughter with Taekwondo. But sometimes just going out and taking a walk or listening to music would be enough to calm you down. And that's especially because of dealing with the kids. Like, there would be times where you'd have to just go walk away and shut the door to your bedroom and calm yourself down, because it's very easy to remain angry all the time. And for those 6 months to a year, I probably was angry most of the time. I could suppress it some of the time, and then it would come out. So when I talked to my mother, she'd get an earful, and I would talk to pretty much anybody that would listen.
So then we Christians have this teaching about forgiveness. And a lot of religions don't, by the way. I learned that from one of the fellows I worked with a few years ago. He said, I'm Hindu. We don't have the concept of forgiveness unless there's complete repentance and a genuine change in life. He said, you Christians are really unusual. And so what did you do with forgiveness?
It took a long time, and I think there were several days where I'd say, okay, I'm choosing to forgive him. And by the end of the day, I'd have run through everything in my head again, and the kids would have acted up, and I'd be really angry at him again. And I think it was just that constant daily battle with yourself of choosing to realize that he's going to suffer his own consequences, and God's going to deal with him in whatever way God's going to deal with him, and I just have to let it go. So it's still not perfect. I still get angry about things, and I, still have anger when it goes back, but every day is a little better. And it was when I finally realized that forgiving him didn't mean that I was going to forget everything that happened and go get back in a relationship with him again, that it became okay. And that first year, it was really hard because that's how I felt. I felt if I forgave him, that meant that I had to accept him back into my life, and things would go back to how they were. So it was better to hold on to that anger and that bitterness and not forgive him. But once I realized, oh, well, that's not true, then it became easier. And I am a lot less bitter than I was at the beginning, and for the most part have forgiven him. But I don't know, is it out of sight, out of mind, or have I truly forgiven him? But I don't feel the contempt towards him that I once did.
Yeah, and that's big, and that comes over time, I think. But I love what you said. You said you don't have to forgive and forget. You can forgive and divorce.
Yeah.
And you can say, I'm not going to reconcile. I can't ever trust this person. Not even 5%, because this is fundamentally a flawed, destructive person who has some character defect that makes them untrustworthy. And it would be foolish for me to trust them again. I can forgive, I can let go of my feelings of vengeance, for example, but trust, inviting him back, no way. And in fact, we need to end it so that we can live at peace. I think that's a big deal.
Exactly.
Everybody wants to know, will my kids be okay? And especially in the case where their dad was, into something like this.
I still have concerns about some things with my kids, but I've seen a lot of growth in all of them, and I think they will be okay. I worry because I'm still not entirely sure that I know the entire truth of everything with all four of them. But I think that they can survive and they have good male role models in their life. And while everyone needs a father, everyone doesn't necessarily need the man who is their biological father if he's not a good godly example for them. So they've got my father, they've got men at church that are great examples, they've got other men in their lives that are great examples. So I think that's more important, and I think it's been healing for them.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And how did they see your dad? How did they interact with him?
Well, the two youngest girls think that my parents are mean. They're strict, and they always have been. But so I think that like that's how they see it. But I know that they love my parents. All four of them do. My son learns a ton from my father, who is kind of my handyman when he comes up and he's teaching my son how to do some of that stuff that where I can't learn it or YouTube can't teach him, then he learns from my father. But I think they've got a good relationship with my parents.
Oh, that's nice. That's great. I'm going to ask you about sex, singleness, and dating again.
So I think I would date again. 5 years ago, my mother said, "Well, how would you ever have time?" And she was right. I wouldn't have, and I wasn't ready. But I think the way that most people meet someone to date now is, online websites, and I'm so leery of them. So I think if God intends for me to date again, he's going to have to plant somebody right in my front yard kind of thing. So I'm open to dating, but I'm cautious because I think I still can be easily sucked into a relationship that might not be good for me because of the history. But I also think that I'm more aware of that. And if I felt that instinct that something's wrong, or if I saw a red flag, then I'm more likely to say, no, this isn't going to be. As far as sex is concerned, I feel strongly that sex belongs inside of a marriage. So if I never marry again, then it won't be. And it is what it is. It gets too messy, those relationships, and and I want to set a good example for my younger girls too, that I think really need to learn self-respect and not be focused on a sexual interest in boys. But I have a funny story about sex where I recently went to the OBGYN for a visit, and they made me take a pregnancy test. And I said, there's no way I'm pregnant. She said, "We don't want to be a statistic." And I said, "I'm telling you, there is no way." And she said, "Well, we just want to be sure." I said, "It's been 5 years." Oh.
I love it. Oh, during my single years, I had the same view you did, and so I'd go see the OB/GYN, just for my, mammograms and stuff like that, and he'd do the. He said, "Should we do a Pap smear on you?" I said, "Well, I guess, aren't I supposed to have one of these on a regular basis?" He said, "Are you sleeping with anyone?" I said, "No, I haven't slept with anyone since 1996. And he said, "Yeah, we're going to just skip it. If you're not sleeping with anyone, you're not going to have any problems." Now, I don't know if that's true medically, but I just thought that was a funny response from him. Okay. Finding safe friends and a safe church. I am sure there are some people who just couldn't handle your story at all. And you probably had some people disappear out of your life and some people come in. Tell me about those people.
So when he was arrested the first time, we were going to a different church, and the pastor kept in touch, and we kept going there, but relationships changed, and I lost several friends. And then later on, he had been on the registry that first time, but for 10 years, and just before he was to get off the registry, there was an incident that caused the church we were going to look at their policies, and they told him that he couldn't attend that church without a supervisor anymore, and that he wasn't allowed on the property unless he had somebody walking with him and watching him. And this was before the second arrest. So I was I was really upset, and I loved that church, and we lost a ton of friends, and I lost my pastor. He wouldn't he wouldn't respond. Like, I asked him questions and he just didn't respond. And it was heartbreaking. And one of the big things for me when that happened was, I said to my husband, I said, but I'm innocent. And he says, well, how do you think I feel? Well, I know that you're upset, but like, I didn't do any of this, and I'm losing my friends and I'm losing my church. And then this time around, the church that I was in, I had gone there. So search warrant was executed on Wednesday. Friday night, I had talked to a couple of friends that were very supportive at church. And then I went to my parents for the weekend because I had to tell my parents. And it was one of the kids' birthdays. And so we were down there, and I came back on Sunday morning, and the pastor came up to me and he said, so I hear you're going to be on the missions committee. And I couldn't even get the word no out without crying. And so he asked what was wrong, and I said, well, he's in trouble. And he said, now or before. Well, it turned out that he and one other man at church knew the history. Somebody called that church and told them about his history. And I'm not sure who it was. I have a guess, but I'm not sure. So most of the people in the church stood by me. There were a few that sided with him, and I felt it was in my best interest for me to separate from them, because not that you want people choosing sides, but in those circumstances, I couldn't have somebody that was relaying messages between us and, that kind of stuff. It wasn't that kind of a relationship. But this church has been amazingly supportive. When I had to move, they had 17 people that came and helped me move. And, I had a 5-bedroom house and a ton of stuff that had to be moved across town. And, they were there for bringing meals and for running kids to and from places when everything started, and just deep friendships. So even if I don't always see eye to eye with some of those friends, they've stood by me, and it doesn't matter what that past was. And I think that it's a good place to be. And I think that although there were some issues with that church and some of the things that were said, I think that overall they're living what the Christian life should be and how they're supporting people.
That's wonderful. What a great story. It's a beautiful story. And moving someone covers a multitude of sins. So any other disagreements you got, you're willing to move furniture. We're best friends. I'll forgive anything. Yep. So what do you wish that churches would do about the pedophile and about the spouse and the children of the pedophile? What do you wish?
Well, it's hard to say what I wish they would do. I think one of the things that was extremely important, that probably is good, is they asked him to leave the church. They asked me what I wanted, and I said I would not be comfortable with him coming back. So they asked him to leave the church. And they also have policies in place where there are background checks done, although I'm not entirely on board with that because it only catches those who have been caught, But the fact that they're not necessarily going to turn their backs on somebody, but they're going to put into place policies that protect the kids as much as they can and watch them and make sure that there aren't adults that are going to be with teens. Because as much as we hate to admit it, the pedophiles need a church too. And when they asked him to leave, they didn't just kick him out. They worked with a pastor at another church to make sure he had some place where he could go. So, they need to provide support but I think they also need to make sure that they're providing support to the injured spouse in this case and the injured children, and make sure they're corrected, that they're taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And how does that happen? How would you want to see churches help the injured spouse and the injured kids?
One, I think that they need to listen to what those people are telling them. We talked a little bit about that. But two, like in our case, there was a Sunday that I wasn't at church, and they had called a special meeting, and they announced it in church since I wasn't there. And then that night they got together and they had anybody that was interested in coming, and they told them what was going on, and they allowed them to ask questions and handled it. And they worked really hard not to allow rumors. It wasn't, like, there isn't a big problem with rumors in our church anyway, but I think that that's important. It's okay for people to ask questions, and it's okay to answer them honestly where you can, but don't let people just, run rampant and say whatever they want to say, and, try and find out what they need. Do the kids need rides places? Do they need financial support? Do they need help finding a new house because they have to move? Or, there's lots of little things, and sometimes it's just getting through the day to day that means more and shows more Christian love than much else that they can do. And then, obviously praying for them and inviting them to Bible studies and all of that kind of stuff is important too. But just helping them live life and walk through whatever's to come is a big thing.
Yeah, just to keep you, including you, so you're not a
Mhm.
pariah. It's not you who did it, but to
Right.
include you and to deliberately include your kids and everything, I think is really, really important. I want to go back
Yep.
to something else you said. When they held this question and answer time, had they kind of asked you to answer these questions first so that they could share the information with the rest of the church? Or how did they know what the right answers were?
It was so early on when they did it that there weren't a lot of answers to questions. So it was either, let's see, it had to have been after his arrest. He was arrested on a Friday morning, and that meeting was that Sunday. And so they were able to tell him that he was arrested, where he was going to be, and what that meant as far as us being there. I don't have a lot of insight into what went on at that meeting, except that I know that there was one woman who was very upset and had to be walked out of the room because of how she how she was responding. But I don't know how much of those questions were being asked because it was in the news. So some people had seen the news and knew that way. It was just that opportunity, I think, for people to say, okay, well, where is he? Is he going to be out on bond? Do we need to worry about him showing up here? I think it's those kinds of questions that sometimes they just do what they can to answer. But they did make sure that I was okay with them having that meeting, and that, that I knew it was going to happen. Which
I mean,
was
I
really
don't
good
know.
too.
I don't know anything about the legal ramifications, but that seems like a caring thing to do and a sensible thing to do, instead of just sweeping everything under the carpet and pretending like nothing happened and nothing to see here. Keep going, keep
Right.
moving. So I really respect that, and I'm not in a position to know what legally is appropriate in every state, but that sounds like a healthy thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was.
Tell me Tell me about loneliness now.
It's hard. And, like I'll talk to my niece. She's an adult and has her own kids. And I'll talk about being lonely, and she'll say, "Well, don't you have your kids?" Well, yeah, I do, but they're teens and adults and they go hang out in their own rooms. And so it's sometimes really hard to be alone. And I find that I use my phone as kind of a lifeline, especially during all of this COVID stuff where I'm stuck at home alone. But I have friends that reach out to me a lot, and I stay in touch either by text or I, go to my parents' house, and being with other people helps. Where I find that I struggle the most with loneliness is when I have to go to activities for the kids, because you look around and everybody else is there as a couple, or they're there but their husband couldn't come because they're someplace else. And that's when it becomes really visible to me that it's just me alone. But as time goes on, I'm getting more used to being alone and being okay with that. But there are still lots of days where I'm sad and I wish I had someone to share life with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's so human. I mean, that's what we were made to do, to share,
Yep.
that close bond with someone. And I'm a huge believer in women. As I said, I was single for 20 years. So I'm a big believer in women friends, and, walking out on the, my best friend and I used to walk out on the beach every single Saturday morning and just share what was going on, and then pray for each other at the end of our walk. And one of my deepest prayer requests was that she would get married before I did. And by this time, let's see, she'd been single 25 years and I'd been single 20 years. And lo and behold, she met a wonderful man online, and she got married. And then an old coworker of mine from 10 years before, I mean, totally professional relationship at work, 6, 7, 8 years later, looked me up and, just happened to ask me to dinner. And I thought nothing of it, because we'd been kind of, we specialized in certain areas in our professional career. And so I just thought, it's just another catch-up dinner as we've had in the past. And so, but things took off from there. So I got married, I believe, I got married 11 months after my best friend, and we both got married at the same venue.
Wow.
And so the Lord answered my prayer that she got married first, and then I got married, and we both feel so lucky, because we even though we now live 50 miles from each other, we still talk, and it's just like, our husbands are wonderful and intimate partners with us, and it's just kind of been a wonderful, just a wonderful opportunity. I mean, I learned so much and grew so much through my women friendships, in understanding what's integrity and what does intimacy feel like from an emotional standpoint, and who can you trust and who can't you trust. And that really prepared me for going into the dating world. So that was great. Okay. Well, you've just answered every question I've got. And this is super. Is there anything I've forgotten that you want to share with us?
I don't think so. I think one of the biggest things that's come out of all of this for me is that it completely changed my view of divorce, because so often I would think, growing up and looking around, that those people shouldn't have gotten divorced. They're supposed to be married forever. But I think that it's important for Christians especially to realize that there are times that we need to divorce, and many of them are life-saving divorces. And even if the divorce is wrong, that we still need to support our friends and be with them and help them walk through whatever it is they're facing, because it can make a world of difference to have a friend that will walk with you, through that divorce, because divorce is hard. And I like I said, I know mine was really easy, but there are women that can be, years and years and going through divorce process, and it's awful.
Yeah.